The macabre history of the Millers, a millionaire paid to keep. 10 kids hidden for decades in the mist-shrouded hills of Northern California, 40 miles inland from the Pacific coast, stood a Victorian mansion that had become the epicenter of one of the most disturbing cases of concealed child abuse in American history. The Miller Estate, a sprawling 19th-century structure surrounded by 200 acres of dense redwood forest, had been purchased in 1978 by Charles and Eleanor Miller, a couple whose outward respectability masked decades of unspeakable secrets. Mansion itself was an architectural marvel, built in 1887 by a railroad baron who had spared no expense in creating a monument to his wealth and power. 3 stories of ornate woodwork, stained glass windows, and elaborate Victorian details rose from perfectly manicured grounds, while a complex network of servants' quarters, storage areas, and utility spaces extended both above and below the main living areas. Charles Miller, a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s, presented himself to the local community as a successful investor who had made his fortune in technology stocks during the early days of Silicon Valley. His wife Eleanor, an elegant woman with prematurely silver hair and penetrating green eyes, claimed to be a former concert pianist who had retired from public performance to focus on charitable work and family life. The couple's arrival in the Favi La Anavea small community of Sequoia Heights had been unremarkable, the kind of wealthy retirees who occasionally chose the area for its natural beauty and privacy. They attended local social functions with appropriate frequency, made generous donations to community organizations, and maintained their property with the meticulous care expected of people of their apparent means. What the residents of Sequoia Heights did not know was that the Miller family was not what it appeared to be. Charles and Eleanor were not wealthy retirees living off investment income, but rather paid caretakers operating under the financial support of a mysterious benefactor whose identity and motivations would remain hidden for decades. The true purpose of the Miller mansion was revealed in its hidden spaces rooms that had been carefully modified and concealed from casual observation. The mansion's original blueprints, filed with the county in 1887, showed a structure with 24 rooms across 3 floors. However, the building that the Millers occupied in 1978 contained additional spaces that existed in no official documentation: concealed chambers, modified storage areas, and a network of passages that allowed movement throughout the house without using the main corridors. These hidden areas housed the Miller family's terrible secret: 10 children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, who lived their entire lives within the confines of the mansion, never setting foot outside its walls, never appearing in any official records, and never interacting with anyone beyond their captors and each other. The children had arrived at the mansion through various means over a period of several years. Some had been acquired as infants from desperate mothers who had been convinced to give up their babies in exchange for promises of better lives for their children. Others had been taken from foster care systems in distant states, their disappearances attributed to administrative errors or runaways who were never seriously pursued. The selection process for these children had been carefully planned and executed by the mysterious benefactor who funded the Miller operation. Each child possessed certain characteristics that made them valuable for the benefactors: unknown purposes, above-average intelligence, specific physical traits, and most importantly, a lack of family connections that would result in intensive searches if they disappeared. The financial arrangement that supported this horrific enterprise was as sophisticated as it was disturbing. Monthly payments of $50,000 were deposited into accounts controlled by Charles and Eleanor Miller, providing more than enough funding to maintain the mansion, support their lifestyle, and care for the hidden children. Additional payments were made for specific services and to cover unexpected expenses related to the children's care and concealment. The source of these payments was carefully obscured through a complex network of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and legal trusts. That made it virtually impossible to trace the money back to its original source. The benefactor had clearly invested considerable resources in ensuring that their identity and involvement could never be discovered through financial investigation. The children's daily lives within the mansion followed a rigid routine designed to maximize their development while maintaining absolute secrecy about their existence. They were educated using advanced curricula that emphasized mathematics, sciences, languages, and classical literature. Their physical health was maintained through carefully planned nutrition and exercise programs, though they never received medical care from outside physicians. The psychological control exercised over the children was as sophisticated as their physical containment. They were taught that the outside world was dangerous and hostile, and that their safety depended entirely on remaining hidden within the mansion. They were told that they were special, chosen for great purposes that would be revealed when they reached maturity, but that these purposes could only be fulfilled if they demonstrated perfect obedience and absolute discretion. Eleanor Miller served as the children's primary caretaker and educator, using her background in music and liberal arts to provide cultural education alongside their academic instruction. She taught them to play various musical instruments, to appreciate classical literature and art, and to conduct themselves with the refinement expected of educated members of society. Charles Miller's role was more administrative and security-focused. He managed the financial aspects of the operation, maintained the mansion's concealment systems, and served as the primary liaison with the mysterious benefactor who funded their activities. He also enforced discipline among the children, using a combination of psychological manipulation and the threat of punishment to maintain order. The mansion's physical security was extensive and sophisticated for 1978. Motion detectors, hidden cameras, and alarm systems monitored all approaches to the property. The building itself had been modified with soundproofing, reinforced doors, and concealed passages that would allow the children to be hidden quickly if unexpected visitors arrived. The children's education was comprehensive but carefully controlled. They learned about history, science, and culture, but always within a framework that emphasized their special status and the importance of maintaining secrecy. They were taught multiple languages, advanced mathematics, and scientific principles that seemed designed to prepare them for specific future roles that were never clearly explained. The social dynamics among the children were complex and carefully managed. They were organized into a hierarchy based on age, intelligence, and compliance with the rules. The older children were given responsibility for supervising and educating the younger ones, creating a system of peer control that reinforced the authority of Charles and Eleanor. Despite their isolation, the children were not entirely cut off from information about the outside world. They had access to carefully selected books, educational materials, and even limited exposure to television and radio programming. However, all of this information was filtered and interpreted through the lens of their captors' explanations about the dangerous and corrupt nature of modern society. The children's emotional development was profoundly affected by their isolation and the circumstances of their captivity. They formed intense bonds with each other, creating a substitute family structure that provided some emotional support in their abnormal circumstances. However, they also displayed signs of anxiety, depression, and other psychological issues that reflected the trauma of their situation. The mysterious benefactor, who funded the Miller operation, maintained contact through encrypted communications and occasional visits that were conducted with extreme secrecy. The children were never allowed to see or interact with this individual, though they were aware of their existence and understood that their continued safety depended on satisfying this person's unknown requirements. The payments to the Miller family increased over time, suggesting that the benefactor's interest in the children grew as they developed and matured. Special bonuses were paid for achieving specific educational milestones, demonstrating particular talents, or meeting other criteria that were never fully explained to Charles and Eleanor. the benefactor's communications with the Millers revealed a sophisticated understanding of child psychology, education, and development. The instructions they provided for the children's care and training demonstrated extensive knowledge of how to shape young minds and prepare them for specific purposes that remained mysterious but were clearly of great importance to the benefactor. As the years passed, the children grew and developed within their confined world, unaware that their entire existence was an elaborate experiment funded by someone whose identity and motivations remained hidden. They accepted their isolation as normal, their education as preparation for important future roles, and their captors as benevolent guardians protecting them from a hostile world. The mansion itself seemed to change over time, as if the weight of its secrets was affecting the very structure of the building. Servants who had worked there in earlier years reported strange sounds, unexplained cold spots, and a general sense of unease that seemed to permeate the entire property. Whether these phenomena were supernatural or simply the psychological effects of living with such dark secrets, they contributed to the mansion's growing reputation as a place where normal rules did not apply. By the late 1980s, the Miller operation had been successfully concealing 10 children for over a decade, with the oldest now approaching adulthood and the youngest still in their early teens. The financial payments continued to arrive monthly, the security systems remained effective, and the community of Sequoia Heights remained unaware of the horrors being perpetrated in their midst. However, the very success of the Miller operation contained the seeds of its eventual exposure. As the children matured, they began asking more sophisticated questions about their situation and their future. The older children, in particular, were starting to question whether their isolation was truly necessary for their protection and whether the promises made about their future roles would ever be fulfilled. The psychological pressure of maintaining such an elaborate deception for so many years was also taking its toll on Charles and Eleanor Miller. The constant vigilance required to keep the children hidden, combined with the moral weight of their actions, was creating stress fractures in their carefully constructed facade of respectability. Most importantly, changes in technology and society were making it increasingly difficult to maintain the kind of complete isolation that the Miller operation required. Improved communication systems, more sophisticated investigative techniques, and growing awareness of child abuse and trafficking were creating new risks that the original architects of the scheme had not anticipated. The stage was set for a discovery that would expose not only the Miller family's terrible secret, but also raise disturbing questions about the identity and motivations of the mysterious benefactor who had funded their operation for over a decade. The 10 children who had spent their entire lives hidden within the mansion walls were about to discover that their carefully constructed world was built on lies, and that their future was far more uncertain than they had ever been led to believe. Beginning of the end for the Miller family's decades-long deception came from an unexpected source. A routine property assessment conducted by Sonoma County officials in the spring of 1994. The county had begun updating its records for tax assessment purposes, using new geographic information system technology to create detailed maps of all properties within its jurisdiction. Property assessor Maria Gonzalez arrived at the Miller estate on a clear March morning, equipped with measuring tools and architectural software designed to verify the accuracy of existing property records. Her job was straightforward: confirm the mansion's square footage, assess any improvements or modifications made since the last official survey, and update the county's tax database accordingly. What Gonzalez discovered during her inspection would trigger the investigation that finally exposed the Miller family's horrific secret. The mansion's actual layout did not match the architectural plans on file with the county. Rooms existed that were not shown in the official blueprints, while other spaces appeared to have been subdivided or modified in ways that suggested extensive unauthorized construction. More troubling still was evidence of recent habitation in areas of the mansion that Charles and Eleanor Miller claimed were unused. Gonzalez found fresh clothing, personal belongings, and other signs of occupancy in rooms that the couple insisted were simply storage spaces or areas that had been closed off due to maintenance issues. The property assessor's most disturbing discovery came when she encountered a teenage girl in one of the mansion's upper corridors. The girl, who appeared to be around 16 years old, seemed startled and frightened by Gonzalez's presence, disappearing quickly into a part of the house that the assessor was unable to access. When Gonzalez asked Charles Miller about the girl's identity, he claimed she was a visiting relative who was staying temporarily at the mansion. However, Gonzalez's professional experience had taught her to be observant about inconsistencies and suspicious circumstances. The girl's appearance, pale skin suggesting limited sun exposure, outdated clothing, and obvious fear of strangers seemed inconsistent with a typical family visit. Moreover, Charles Miller's explanation was delivered with a nervousness that suggested he was not telling the truth about the situation. Following her visit to the Miller estate, Gonzalez filed a report with the county assessor's office that detailed not only the property's tax assessment issues but also her concerns about the welfare of the young person she had encountered. The report was forwarded to the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department, where it was assigned to Detective Robert Chun, a veteran investigator with extensive experience in child welfare cases. Detective Chun's initial investigation revealed several red flags that warranted further scrutiny of the Miller family. The couple had no official records of hosting visiting relatives, no documentation of additional residents in their household, and no permits for the extensive modifications that had clearly been made to the mansion's interior structure. More significantly, a background check on Charles and Eleanor Miller revealed inconsistencies in their claimed personal histories. Their financial records showed regular large deposits that seemed inconsistent with their stated income sources. Their social connections were limited and carefully managed, suggesting they were actively avoiding the kind of community integration that would be normal for people of their apparent social status. The detective's investigation was complicated by the Miller family's wealth and apparent respectability. They had established themselves as pillars of the local community, making generous donations to charities and maintaining relationships with influential local figures. Any aggressive investigation would require solid evidence of wrongdoing, not just suspicious circumstances and unexplained inconsistencies. Detective Chun's breakthrough came when he decided to conduct surveillance of the Miller property using telephoto photography and electronic monitoring equipment. Over several weeks of observation, he documented evidence of multiple individuals living within the mansion who never appeared outside its walls and who seemed to follow highly regimented daily routines. The surveillance revealed the existence of at least 8 to 10 young people ranging in age from early teens to young adults, all of whom appeared to be living permanently within the mansion. None of these individuals appeared in any official records, had any documented connection to the Miller family, or showed any signs of normal social interaction with the outside world. Armed with this evidence, Detective Chun obtained a search warrant for the Miller estate, citing concerns about potential child endangerment, human trafficking, and violations of county building codes. The warrant authorized a comprehensive search of the property and interviews with all residents, regardless of their claimed relationship to the Miller family. The execution of the search warrant on June 15, 1994, resulted in one of the most shocking discoveries in Sonoma County's law enforcement history. Hidden within the Miller mansion were 10 young people, ranging in age from 14 to 24, who had been living in complete isolation from the outside world for periods ranging from 6 to 16 years. The young people's reactions to the arrival of law enforcement officers revealed the depth of their psychological conditioning and fear. They cowered in hidden rooms, refused to speak to strangers, and seemed terrified by the prospect of leaving the mansion. Several appeared to believe that the officers were dangerous intruders who posed a threat to their safety and well-being. Initial interviews with the victims were conducted by specially trained child psychologists and social workers who understood the unique challenges of working with individuals who had been subjected to long-term isolation and psychological manipulation. Dr. Sarah Peterson, a specialist in cult deprogramming and trauma recovery, led the team responsible for gradually gaining the victims' trust and understanding their experiences. The victims' accounts painted a picture of systematic psychological control that was as sophisticated as any recognized cult or extremist organization. They had been taught to believe that the outside world was dangerous and corrupt, and that their safety depended entirely on remaining hidden within the mansion under the protection of Charles and Eleanor Miller. The investigation revealed that the Miller operation had been funded by a mysterious benefactor whose identity was concealed through an elaborate network of financial structures and legal entities. Bank records showed monthly payments of $50,000 to accounts controlled by the Millers, with additional payments for special services and unexpected expenses related to the victim's care and concealment. The search for the benefactor's identity led investigators through a complex web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and legal trusts that had been specifically designed to prevent discovery. However, advances in financial investigation, techniques, and international cooperation eventually allowed investigators to trace the payments back to their source. The benefactor was revealed to be Dr. Marcus Blackwood, a wealthy psychiatrist and researcher who had made his fortune through pharmaceutical investments and who had been conducting unauthorized psychological experiments on the hidden children for over 15 years. Blackwood had been using the Miller mansion as a laboratory for studying the effects of isolation, manipulation, and controlled environments on human development and behavior. Dr. Blackwood's motivations were a mixture of scientific curiosity and personal obsession with controlling and shaping human behavior. He had developed theories about human potential that could only be tested through the kind of long-term isolation and manipulation that would be impossible to conduct through legitimate research channels. The victims had been subjected to various psychological tests, educational experiments, and behavioral modifications that were designed to study their responses and development under controlled conditions. Their isolation had not been simply a matter of concealment, but rather a crucial component of Dr. Blackwood's research into human psychology and development. The legal proceedings that followed the discovery of the Miller operation were complex and unprecedented. Charles and Eleanor Miller faced charges that included kidnapping, child endangerment, conspiracy, and operating an unlawful research facility. Dr. Blackwood was charged with human trafficking, conducting illegal medical experiments, and conspiracy to commit numerous felonies. The victims' recovery and integration into normal society proved to be an extraordinarily challenging process. Many had spent their entire conscious lives in isolation and had no understanding of how to function in conventional social, educational, or work environments. Specialized rehabilitation programs were developed to help them gradually adapt to the outside world while addressing the psychological trauma they had endured. The investigation also revealed the existence of extensive documentation of Dr. Blackwood's experiments, including detailed records of the victims' psychological profiles, development patterns, and responses to various stimuli and interventions. This documentation provided valuable insights into the effects of long-term isolation and psychological manipulation, while also serving as evidence of the systematic nature of the abuse. The Miller mansion itself was eventually seized as evidence, and later demolished due to the extensive modifications that had been made to support the illegal activities conducted there. The property was sold, and the proceeds were used to establish a fund for the victims' ongoing care and rehabilitation. The case attracted national attention as an example of how wealth and sophistication could be used to conceal systematic abuse and exploitation. It also raised important questions about the regulation of psychological research and the protection of vulnerable individuals from those who would exploit them for scientific or personal purposes. Follow-up studies of the victims revealed varying degrees of success in their recovery and integration into mainstream society. Some were able to achieve remarkable progress in overcoming their trauma and building normal lives, while others continued to struggle with the psychological effects of their long-term isolation and manipulation. The Miller case became a landmark example of the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation, regardless of the sophistication or apparent respectability of those who would harm them. It demonstrated that even the most elaborate schemes to conceal abuse could eventually be exposed through careful investigation and the courage of those willing to act on their suspicions. The 10 young people who had spent their lives hidden within the Miller mansion became living proof of both human resilience and the devastating effects of systematic psychological abuse. Their eventual emergence into the normal world, while traumatic and challenging, demonstrated that even the most severe attempts to control and manipulate human development could not completely extinguish the fundamental human capacity for recovery and growth. The macabre history of the Miller family serves as a reminder that the most dangerous forms of abuse are often those that are disguised as care or protection, and that society must remain vigilant in protecting its most vulnerable members from those who would exploit them for personal gain or scientific curiosity. The case continues to inform our understanding of psychological manipulation and the importance of maintaining ethical standards in all forms of human research and interaction. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,